Hi there, I'm Karen Burnell. I'm one of the services managers here at Lymphoma Action, and I'd like to welcome you all to this afternoon's webinar, What is it like to have chemotherapy? And this follows on from our previous webinar, What is chemotherapy?, which is available to view on our website. So without further ado, let me introduce you to our panel. We have Angela and Phil with us today, who both have experience of chemotherapy. And we also have Gemma, who's a clinical nurse specialist from Southport and Ormskirk. So I'm going to come to Angela and Phil first, because before we start the questions proper, I'd like you both to tell us how you came to be diagnosed with lymphoma and what your treatment was.
Hi everybody, really good to be here. So my journey started back in September 2020, where I found what I thought was a really innocent lump in my neck, but it didn't go away. I didn't have any other symptoms, I didn't feel ill, I wasn't in any pain, I just had this hard lump. So I did go to my GP and he said, we'll send you for an ultrasound scan just to rule things out, we're not expecting to find anything. I went for that scan and I knew straight away that it was something, because they then did a biopsy there and then. Unfortunately, my diagnosis journey was quite a long one, so that particular biopsy didn't give us a diagnosis. So I then went on to have numerous other biopsies, scans, had a couple of surgeries, and it finally, we got to January 21 and I was finally diagnosed with diffuse large B-cell lymphoma. And I remember the consultant saying to me, you've got an aggressive form, and in the same breath he said, but that's good news. So that's kind of when my journey started and my life changed. I kind of got told straight away, you will need chemotherapy, and that to me was a really scary word. I was fighting everything to not have chemotherapy, but I trusted my team and they said, look, this is what we do. So 10 days later, I started R-CHOP chemotherapy and went through that. I was looking that I had 3 cycles. A lot of people I know have to have 6. And then that was followed by 15 rounds of radiotherapy. So I think for me, when I was diagnosed, after the usual denial, shock, upset, horror, whatever you want to call it, I decided that this wasn't going to beat me. I was going to fight it. And for me, that was to try and stay as normal as possible. So I tried to carry on working, and I did work throughout my treatment. Though I did have to have the odd day off here and there and the odd week off, but I did manage to work throughout my treatment, which for me was a really great thing to do. And then after I finished my treatment, I had the agonising wait until I had my final end of treatment PET scan, which was on the 27th of July that year. Sorry, on the 27th of July that year, I found out that I was in remission. And I've been in remission coming up to 2 years now. So I now have 2 birthdays every year. I have my remission birthday and I have my birthday for my normal age. I prefer my remission one.
Thanks, Angela. The same question to Phil.
Hi, good afternoon. I nearly said good morning, and it's great to be here. And well, it's sort of very similar to Angela, really, although journeys are always a little bit different. But my I suppose, start of the journey was all back in April 2017. I was feeling not well. I was feeling quite washed out all the time. I'd noticed that occasionally I was having night sweats, quite well, drenching night sweats, I think they call them, and also had a few nodes in my neck had started swelling. So went to the doctor, and well, a bit like Angela, but not as extensive in terms of to-ing and fro-ing. You know, discussed the symptoms and what to do next, but was referred quite quickly to haematology in the hospital Royal Hallamshire in Sheffield, where I live, and saw a consultant and was visually sort of diagnosed, I would say, with some form of lymphoma, and she felt it was probably a fast-acting one, and sent off for a biopsy, and then got caught into that diagnosis vicious circle. I had biopsy that didn't show lymphoma, so I was told it must have been a viral thing. And that didn't sort of sit well with me, because I knew something was wrong. And so they said, oh, come back in 6 weeks and we'll do some bloods and you know, see how it's going. So that was a good safety net for me. But 6 weeks later, I went along, had a blood test, and I remember very clearly going off to the cinema with my family, and came back home afterwards, and there was a message on the phone from the hospital. And I phoned them up, and the doctor said, oh, we need you to come in. And I sort of said, well, when? Like now. And I thought, oh, okay, this is a bit more serious than I thought. And well, anyway, long story short, I went in, the blood results showed there was lymphoma or whatever. So they said, look, you'll have to, you know, come in for chemo. And so they put me on steroids and to keep me going. But anyway, I started feeling even worse, and it turned out that I developed a bleed on my intestines, which is you know, something that was they didn't want to see, and certainly they wouldn't let me have chemo. Well, I wouldn't let the chemo start until that was resolved. So I ended up going into hospital for a couple of weeks in isolation for quite a period of that. But the reason I'm telling you this backstory is that I felt very clearly, like Angela, I had this fast-acting lymphoma, and I suppose I wanted chemo as soon as possible. And so by the time they'd sorted out my intestines, I was up for it. I wasn't, well, I was obviously worried by it, but I wanted to start it as soon as possible. So, so yeah, anyway, finally diagnosed with large B-cell fast-acting diffuse non-Hodgkin lymphoma, bit of a mouthful, stage 3. By then it was in quite a lot of different places, particularly my stomach and my neck. So, so yeah, 6 rounds of R-CHOP, no surgery, no radiotherapy or anything like that. And after 6 rounds, the PET scan, that nervous wait that Angela was talking about, and yeah, been in remission ever since. So,
well,
so here I am.
Thanks so much, Phil.
That's the journey.
Thank you. And I'm going to come to Gemma. So Gemma, can you please tell us about your role in supporting people with lymphoma through the treatment experience?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's really great to be here, first of all, and hi to everyone. So I'm Gemma Alston. I've worked for around about 20 years now within haematology and chemotherapy. So currently, as the clinical nurse specialist here in haematology, we have quite a unique role within cancer services, because we take patients right from diagnosis. We are there through periods of watch and wait, through your treatment plan, which most CNSs stop at that point because we refer on to oncologists. But in haematology, we take you right the way through chemotherapy and into maintenance therapies and follow-up care afterwards, and generally keeping an eye on people for a number of years after. So quite unique really in that support. Most of my support is face-to-face. Most patients will come and see me on a regular basis. However, we're always on the end of the phone for triage and those unexpected and those conversations really when they need to happen. The most important thing is we're delivering that holistic care. We tend to get to know families and carers and are able to support people completely.
Well, thanks, Gemma. So with the questions for the webinar, we've split them up. So the first section is preparing for chemo. So I'm going to direct this to you, first of all, Angela. What did you think and how did you feel when the topic of treatment with chemotherapy was first mentioned to you? So what were your concerns, fears, questions at that point, and what were you told to expect?
So Up until the day I was diagnosed, I still believed I hadn't got anything, because they kept saying, you know, it's inconclusive. I was convinced I was going to go into that meeting and they were going to say, no, you haven't got it. You know, we need to look at something else. When they told me I had to have chemotherapy, and they told me straight away I would, my first question was, am I going to lose my hair? And my consultant said yes. He didn't fluff anything up, he just said yes. And for me, that was the worst thing. It was my worst nightmare. At the time, I had long blonde hair. It was kind of my main. I'm a Leo, I'm a lion. So to the thought of losing my hair just horrified me. And I think the other thing about chemo that frightened me was sickness. I'm not great when I'm being sick. I'm still a bit of a baby. And I had visions that I would just be head over the toilet bowl for weeks at a time. I was reassured really quickly about that by my consultant, but my hair for me was the thing I really, really struggled to get my head around. So I think I knew I needed it, and I knew I had to come to terms with it, but I was frightened, and I was just devastated that I was going to lose my hair.
Oh, thanks for that, Angela. Phil, have you got anything to add?
Well, apart from what I said earlier, that it was all a bit of a whirl for me, and you know, I'd sort of probably convinced myself I was proper poorly, as you might say. So yeah, I didn't fancy it. I was worried about the sickness. You know, I've never really been that worried about being sick. You know, but yeah, like Angela said, I had this vision of just having my head down the toilet all day, and the hair loss. Well, that started a long time ago for me. That worried me, and also, you know, those worries about whether, you know, it'd be successful or not. That was always the concern in the back of the mind. I was thinking about this last night, and in terms of preparing for it. You know, I didn't manage to build up my strength because I felt so ill anyway. I didn't manage to follow a good diet because I just couldn't cope with you know, a great range of foods or anything like that. But what I did get into, and I saw it on a BBC health program at the time, was meditation, but through the Headspace app. I don't know if people have come across that, and I've never meditated before. I did a bit of yoga when I was younger, but I just took to it. And the good thing about that, in terms of getting ready for the chemo or whatever, you know, that meant for me, was to be able to try and sit down with it. I suppose that's what you know, I wasn't necessarily going to fight it in that sense. I just wanted to sit down with it, and I think the guy that runs Headspace, Andy Puddicombe, said sit down alongside your cancer, and you know, let the medical team do the fighting, and that just appealed to me, and that helped me get ready for the challenges, I think.
Well, thanks, Phil. Gemma, I'm going to come to you now. So how do you bring up the topic of chemotherapy, and what are common questions or concerns that people share with you?
Okay, so quite often chemotherapy may have been discussed as a possibility going on in consultation. We tend then to take our findings to our multidisciplinary team meetings where we have a discussion. And we generally like then to see the patient face to face to discuss those findings. Sometimes there can be several treatment options that come out of that meeting that we'd want to discuss with the patient and make a joint decision on. Sometimes it's very straightforward treatment pathway. We have this option, this is where we're going. Generally face to face, we like to have all the information at hand. So written information for the patient to go home with is really important. And also having extra ears in the room. So are the relatives coming with us? Have we got husbands, wives, daughters, sons around as well? Because generally when you're told you're having chemotherapy, that might be as much as you hear. it's to take that information home and digest it. So we like to give a good period of time then between giving that information and that news, that treatment pathway. We give our phone numbers in case there's any issues within the time, and usually see you again in about a week with whoever you want to bring in. But advising, you know, bring me a list of questions, challenge me, bring it on down, let's have a good chat. And then that session in a week's time is usually patient-led. So, you know, any questions you bring to the table, let's talk them through, let's see if we can answer them. If you're happy at the end of that, we then put together the treatment pathway. When we will start, again, it's one of those where we're discussing what works for you, as well as from a medical point of view, our urgency in the situation. If we can have time before we start, then we will build that in for you. I've got patients at the moment who want a holiday before we start chemotherapy. So if that's appropriate and we can medically fit that in, that's exactly what we will do before we start chemotherapy. So main questions I come across, I think Phil and Angela have really hit the nail on the head. We always discuss nausea, always just nausea and vomiting. I think it really impacts on a person's life. It's something none of us like, but that reassurance that we can work with that. We should be able to, you know, nobody should have to feel nausea. They shouldn't have to experience vomiting. Really important to get that right from the outset, because a lot of nausea and vomiting has a psychological element to it. So it's very much that apprehension of coming in sets you off before you even start. So if we can build that confidence that we don't have to go there, we prevent that element sneaking on in. And hair loss is always a really big worry for people. I know I've discussed previously with Phil, you know, for gentlemen, the issue of a beard, mustache, it's a sense of identity to people. And as Angela mentioned before, you know, long hair especially, we're all very proud of our hair. It's a big thing to lose. So discussing that really early on with patients and getting them into the right places. So if they want a wig, getting them to see the specialists for the wigs early on. Let's see what your hair looks like before we start interfering, and get them fitted for something ready for their journey, so they're not having that period of time with no hair that worries them. I suppose the other big issue we have is infection risk to patients, especially now on the back of COVID. Infection risk is really high up there in the concerns for patients. So it's making sure that people, arming them really with the right information so that they can prepare how they're going to minimise risk to themselves. And I suppose mixed in with that, it's having that contact with friends and family. Patients will worry about whether they're able to have that contact. And also, you can't always stop the contact. If you're a carer for children or a carer for a member of family, etc., it's very difficult to prevent that contact and lock yourself away and protect yourself. So it's how we can make the best of a situation and work alongside patients, giving advice before we even start.
Thanks, Gemma. I just want to pick up on something that you said about when you give the phone numbers out. And the only reason I'm asking this is because as I administer the Facebook group, I see it regularly. You know, the moderators will say, talk to your team. Oh, well, I've got the number, but you don't like because they're busy. Please reassure people.
Absolutely. This is what we're here for. So it is our job. We are busy. You can't lie about that. You know, the news doesn't help us. They'll tell you, well, we're really busy, but this is what we're here to do. So we're here to support people through this journey. So we will always make time. Every hospital is slightly different. I work with two numbers, if you like. I have a triage line, which is a bit like our 999 call. We need help, you're not well. Patients will avoid it, given the truth. They will try and avoid ringing that number and pressing the big red button, but the other number is to ring through to me directly on the unit. So obviously if I'm with patients or in a clinic, but we'll always get back to you on that number within 24 hours. And that's pretty much a standard across the country, that we try and respond to calls within 24 hours. and triage emergency numbers really very quickly if there's a concern.
Thanks, Gemma. My next question is about preparing yourself for chemotherapy practically. Now, Phil, you've mentioned here about the meditation, so I'm going to come on to Angela. Was there anything that you did to prepare practically?
So I think that there were two bits for me. So the first bit was around my work. So what was I going to be able to do? And I think I was a bit ambitious my first round of chemo, because I decided I was only taking the day off I had chemo, and I went back to work the next day, and I learned really quickly that was a bad idea. So in subsequent rounds I took a few days off after I had the chemo, but as I said earlier, it was really important for me to stay as normal as possible. So by knowing I could do work and I could drop in and out of work, that was a real positive for me. I think practically from just having the treatment and what I needed, I got told my first round I'd probably be there all day. I'd be there 8 hours. So I had a real goodie bag with me of my iPad with, I think I downloaded the first series of Bridgerton, which was a bit challenging to watch when you've been checked every few minutes. Obviously, some of the steamy scenes, some of the nurses saw more than they thought they would. But I did stupid things like I bought a colouring book and I had colouring pencils, because that made me relax. Candy Crush Saga, I'm a big fan of that, so I made sure I had plenty of lives to do that. I took snacks. People said taking things like mints and lemons, because they're quite a strong taste, because you can get some strange taste in your mouth when you're having the chemotherapy done. But I think a big thing for me, and this will not suit everybody, is that I wanted to look like me every time I went for chemotherapy. So even in the subsequent rounds where I didn't feel as good, I still got up, I put my makeup on. First time I still had my hair, the next two my hair would more or less gone, so I put my wig on, and I just looked like me as far as I was concerned going for those sessions. So yeah, I think there's a bit about doing what's right for you, but preparing that you're going to be there a long time, so making sure you can occupy yourself.
A top one for me is always talk to people about what you're about to go through. Generally, there used to be a stigma with chemotherapy. Now we're looking at statistics of 1 in 2 having cancer. So it's a thing that we should be discussing with people. And I tend to find for people, if they've told people what's happening, then people help. And that may even be, do you know what, I've got a cold, I'm not going to visit that day. So really practical things. It might be, I'll drop some food off. Or like Angela said, if you want to start work, that communication with your work early on is really important. And being realistic, I'm having chemo on these days, and therefore I'm not going to be in on a Wednesday, Thursday, Friday that week. But it allows work to work with you. It allows family and friends to work alongside you as well. So having those conversations early on and preparing for people. I've also put things like developing good eating habits. So planning meals, keeping your strength up through eating, maintaining a good weight is really important. It also helps, obviously good eating helps your cells repair, it helps you recover from these things, and it keeps your energy levels as high as possible. So starting out with a plan really early on of what meals you're going to have, what food can you have in. It might be that you've got a meal ready on your chemo days, so you're going to eat when you come home. It might be that you're ready for the few days afterwards when you're feeling a bit tired to have your chemo. A diary really helps with that, because it helps you plan what you feel like and when. Also, from a practical point of view, we mentioned before sort of getting the wig fitted, that sort of thing, looking at travel arrangements, so it's not last minute, it's not an added pressure for you. So how am I getting to my appointments? Do you need assistance with that? Is that something your CNS can help with? The other thing we've said about is dependence. So lots of people have got dependents, whether it's mothers, fathers, elderly relatives, children, walking the dog. You know, who's going to let the dog out during the day while you're in the hospital for 8 hours? Or making those arrangements and having those plans in place take pressure off on the days that you've got to have chemotherapy. So it's really thinking very, very broadly about taking that pressure off. And then there's the practical things, as Angela said. Make sure your iPad's charged up. Have I got internet at the hospital I'm going to? Lemon sherbets are amazing. Board games, whatever it is. I've played cards with my patients while I'm giving them their chemo. You know, things to keep you going. There are lots and lots of ideas now around about colouring pads, new books, those little treats on chemo days that keep you interested, the new game on your phone or your iPad, something a bit different, keep the brain going, keep you distracted effectively. But definitely meet the team, get those advice, get that information about where you're having the chemotherapy.
Thanks, Gemma. I'm going to come back to you now, Phil, and ask you, is there anything to add about what helped you physically preparing for chemotherapy?
Yeah. Well, it was interesting. We was saying earlier before we started this meeting, I did keep a diary, and I found it last night. Well, this morning, and it was incredibly detailed about some things. Just to pick up a few things what Gemma said, is food was an interesting, like we were saying, I was never physically sick, but I always felt sick. And yeah, get your meals planned, but also be flexible. I find in that first week after the chemo, how would I describe my diet? Beige. Oven chips featured a lot, apple crumbles, and stuff like that. And if you analysed it, Gemma would really tell me off about not following a proper diet. But that just got me through. Ginger-based drinks, ginger beer, fizzy ginger beer was my thing. And we're all so different, aren't we? It's about finding that. And well, I'll admit to before chemo, I enjoyed a beer and a nice glass of wine. They went straight out the window. And eventually, through trial and error, I found gin and tonics became my drink. Not excessively, I'd like to say, but occasionally helped me relax. And it's about that, trying something and then because I was on a 3-week cycle. As I'm sure, I think, Angela, were you on 3 weeks? And the first week, I didn't want to do a lot. Games, colouring pad, I just wanted to sit down. And I think maybe we might come across it later, but brain fog, I'll put this down to, is while I was having chemo and for a few days after, I just wanted to sit down and not sleep either. I sort of didn't even doze. I was just like looking mindlessly at other people having chemo in the chemo lounge or whatever. So I think, yeah, that was my experience anyway.
Thanks, Phil. I'm going to come now to asking about what helped you emotionally. So I'll put this one to Angela. So what helped you emotionally when you were preparing for chemotherapy?
So the day that I was diagnosed, my CNS gave me the Lymphoma Action booklet, and the best advice she gave me was do not Google. She said, do not Google, use these just resources from Lymphoma Action, Macmillan, Blood Cancer UK. That was the best advice she gave, and I was pretty good at not Googling. So I read that book that I was given cover to cover. I also gave it to my husband to read, so he understood. And for me, I was very careful. So just to put it into perspective, we were in the middle of the pandemic when I went through all my treatments, so we weren't really seeing people, we weren't going out, etc. So I was very careful about who I told what I was going through, and I had some very close friends that were my absolute rocks through chemo, and they, from an emotional point of view, my female friends were probably better at that than my husband was. My husband was quite black and white about it, whereas my female friends could give me that emotional support. We were allowed to go outside, so I used to meet one friend for a dog walk, and I knew on that dog walk, if I just wanted to shout, if I wanted to cry, I could do all that. We would laugh. So I think for me, picking those people that were in my world when I was going through chemotherapy really helped me out. And obviously I couldn't have got through it without the support of Lymphoma Action, and especially the Facebook group.
It's good to hear. Phil, can you add anything to that?
Well, certainly Lymphoma Action, you know, and the Google thing. Oh, I left that to my partner. You know, I didn't Google a blooming thing, and so she had all the knowledge. It was, you know, and again, it's back to that sort of thing. I just sat down and let it all happen. But what I did do, I've got, well, I had quite an outward-facing job, sort of. I'm a surveyor, and was into training and development of other surveyors. So you know, I often travelled the country speaking at conferences and seminars. So what I did is I was quite open with those networks, family and friends, and even these clients, if you want to call them that. And I'm also quite a music fan. I use Spotify a lot. So I sort of said to everybody, I just sent a general email out saying, look, I've, you know, got lymphoma, about to go into chemo, and I'm assembling an uplifting playlist. Can you contribute? Can you make suggestions? No rules, just, you know, what you think would be helpful when I'm having chemo or feeling rubbish. And it was brilliant. About 60 people contributed, and I got a fantastic range of music, and I didn't discriminate. I put rubbish up there as well as good stuff, and that really helped me. It sort of helped me connect with people in some ways, and in a way it helped them connect with me, because there was that, oh, Phil's got cancer, and you know, and I'm still of, you know, I'm not that old, 66, but I'm of a generation where cancer was a sort of a death sentence, really, when I was a kid, and it helped with quite a few people help have that dialogue. Interestingly, just a last thing on this point, 4 people suggested "I Will Survive" by Gloria Gaynor, and so I only put one of those choices.
That's a favourite at a Scouse karaoke, Phil.
Yeah, well, you know, I'll be up there.
Gemma, can you add anything to this about helping emotionally?
Yeah, I would agree completely with Phil and Angela. It's about them connections you have with people. Quite often you hear when people tell people they've got cancer, people don't know how to respond. Some are either all over you and want to do everything, some are running away in the other direction. It's quite hard to find the ones in the middle. But it is about keeping those connections going. It takes effort, and you're tired, so finding those people who will meet you halfway are fantastic. Accessing these support groups are amazing. So as you hear, through COVID, the online support groups with Lymphoma Action have been amazing for people, and feedback to us has been wonderful. Just knowing other people are out there going through very similar experiences as you is invaluable, really, as well as bouncing ideas off people is great. I suppose my other advice would be realistic about what you're going through, be very emotionally aware, be honest with yourself. So not waking up going, I'm fine, if you're not truly fine. Okay, so be really honest about how you're feeling that day, and be very aware of where to get that support and when you've reached your limit and need that support, because it is out there. It is. So having that emotional awareness and encouraging those people around you to seek that support as well, because you cannot support yourself and the others. So if it's a husband, wife, children, mums, dads, families, whoever it is, they are on the outskirts of this, and it's often really difficult for them because you're in fight or flight. You're going to go for it or you're not, but you're in control. The relatives are not in control, and they're looking from the outskirts and often find it quite difficult. You can't cope with your own emotions physically, going through this process as well. and help support the others. So it's encouraging them to also seek support as well. And I know there are carers groups out there. Lymphoma Action also have carers groups, but encouraging them to get support is a really good place to start as well, and concentrate on you.
Thanks, Gemma. The next section here is having chemo, and we're asking what it's like to actually have chemo, and was it what you expected? So, Angela?
I think my CNS had been amazing before I started chemo, and really got me to understand what was going to happen. I think when you're there and it's happening to you, it's almost like it's happening to somebody else. You're watching as all these drugs are going into you, and it's quite frightening as you watch essentially drugs going into you that are going to poison your system. And I think the thing for me was that I didn't feel ill. I never ever felt ill, and I could not get my head around the fact that you are going to make me ill when I'm not ill. And on the day, it was absolutely fine. The first day I was there, like I say, I was there for 8 hours. Everything went swimmingly. I'd got in my head that as I was driving home, I'd be getting my husband to pull over so I could be sick, and obviously that didn't happen. I didn't think I'd want to eat. I got home and I had tea. I did start feeling quite well during the night, to do with sickness and nausea and what have you, but that was sorted out. That was a one-off. So I think that the brief answer is I didn't really know what was going to happen until it happened. And once I'd had that first round, I was really comfortable with the next couple of rounds and what I was going to go through. So I think I was well prepared, but in a way it's still fear of the unknown until you actually yourself personally go through it.
Okay, thank you. Phil, have you got anything to add to that?
Yeah. Well, I apart from agreeing with Angela, it's like it went much better than I imagined. I suppose the thing is again, because I had a couple of weeks of chaos in my life, trying to sort out previous problems before chemo started. I'd sort of got used to needles and cannulas and things like that. And I know what Angela was saying about the sickness thing. A lot of us really worried about being sick and things like that. And also a lot of us are worried about needles and cannulas and things like that. And I think it's just a fact of life when you're having chemo. Me and my wife always used to laugh was, how many different nurses will try and find my vein? And I think I was up to 4. It was my records. And sometimes it's difficult. If I don't know the reasons for it, maybe low blood pressure or whatever. But yeah, it's just part of it. And I suppose quite early doors, I'd come to realise that I've got to have this stuff to keep me alive. And so I want it in there. It's going to make me feel ill. It's going to poison me. It's going to do me harm. But also, as hopefully you can see, it's given me at least 6 years extra life. So so I came to terms with that. But that was, one of the big issues, I suppose, at the start of each session of, trying to get the cannulas in. And do you go for a PIC line, is it, Gemma? Or, do you have something stuck in your neck most of the time, or wherever? So yeah, just getting used to that culture almost. I think I found quite useful early doors.
Thanks, Phil. So Gemma, can you add anything onto that? How do you help people prepare for that day of treatment, the first day of treatment?
Yeah, I would just say it's down to communication. Let us know what your worries are. So we discuss all the side effects. If there's one of those or 2 or 3 that really worry you, they're the ones we're going to focus on. So if you're really, really worried about being sick, let's get some pre-medication in. Let's give you something that you take before you even come to the door that day for your chemo. So we're covering you and making sure that doesn't come in. Needles are a problem. Do we look at a line? Is a line a better option for you? but generally there is normally a way around most things, shall we say. So nothing's too silly. It's just about asking us, let us work alongside you and work with you. And we start with what your main concerns are, really. Hopefully in that way, we may never experience them, and if we do, we know they're important to you and we can jump on them pretty quick and see what we can do.
We've talked so much about side effects already, and that's the next section. So we've talked already about nausea and hair loss. I know we're going to look at fatigue in a few moments. But Gemma, are medical teams able to help prepare people for side effects happening, and what is in place to help?
Yeah, I think, as I said, it is about that, having a chat with us about what's really important to you. We will give most patients on the day of their treatment, we will give anti-sickness drugs on the day, and we'll also give you them to go home with. If it's something that really worries you, we can have them before the day. We can give you more to go home with. It's having those conversations. Again, we do look at patients' veins in the hands and arms before we bring you in for chemotherapy, in case we think that's going to be a problem, so that we can discuss the advantages and disadvantages of having a semi-permanent line put in, which are fairly simple things to have placed, but it's something that at least we can start communicating and having a chat with about beforehand. I think psychological support is really important early on. We want to try and prevent those little gremlins getting in there, those little nagging things that are going to really get at you throughout it. Little things like going around the unit, go and have a look, can alleviate fears. You know, day to day, we don't expect to know what chemotherapy looks like. You know, if you ask someone completely inexperienced, they're not going to have a clue. They might think it's some huge machine you're going to go in, or it's some funny coloured stuff you're going to get. So can you go and have a look at the unit? Can you meet the team who's going to be administering it? What does it look like? Really, you know, quite simple things that can put the mind to rest and stop it overworking. So it just stops it all being a mystery, really, because it is quite simple. It's quite simple looking. It is quite disappointing, actually. I don't know if you agree. It's a little, there's nothing dramatic about it. It's a bit disappointing. But yeah, give us a talk to us.
Thanks, Gemma. I'm going to come back now to just mention about hair loss again. I know that you mentioned, Angela, about your mane of hair that you were concerned about losing. How did you manage it, Phil? How did you manage the hair loss side of it?
In many ways, it's different for men. Well, don't want to be too gender based, but you know, a lot of us as we get older start losing it anyway, and several friends I've got seem to purposely shave the head most days. But what I found, and I didn't have a beard then. What I found was I'm quite a hairy guy. This might be too much information for listeners out there, but when that started going, you know, chest hair, arm hair, leg hair, and pubic hair, all that sort of stuff, I was completely hairless after I think two rounds, 3 rounds, something like that. And I guess, just to be very blunt about it, I haven't been in that situation since I was about 11 or 12. So that was quite a shock, actually. That came a bit left field for me, because I was focusing on, you know, I lost my eyebrows, which are excessive anyway, and the hair, but then, you know, I remember getting out of the shower one morning going, whoa, okay, yeah, that's different. And I guess that's just part of it, really. And there's no wig you can wear, or there's no need for it, you know, in that sense. But psychologically, I think just saying to myself, look, it's only here, and it'll come back. That got me through.
Well, thanks, Phil. Angela, you mentioned about wearing your wig to appointments. Did you stick with the wigs, or did you try something else? Did you try maybe headscarves or anything?
So if I left the house, so generally that was to go to hospital, I always had a wig on when I left the house. If I was working and I was on Teams call, I had a wig on. So if I was just in the house, me and hubby, I had various headscarves that were really comfortable. I used to sleep in a kind of beanie hat because it was so cold, not having hair at night all of a sudden. So what I tried to do before I lost my hair, I did have long hair, as I said, but I got my hairdresser to cut it short. And then I got a wig that kind of matched what that style was, so that to people that didn't know what I was going through, they knew no different. They didn't know they thought the wig was my own hair. There's some pretty good wigs out there and you don't have to spend a lot of money on them. So I did get fitted for a professional wig, but I actually wore my cheaper ones a lot more than the professional one. But everybody is different. I mean, the bonuses are, as a woman, I didn't have to shave my legs, I didn't have to shave under my arms and other places, so that's always a bonus. But I'm not going to deny it's a shock when you're used to seeing yourself with long hair and you look in the mirror and you haven't got any. It's a real shock, but you do come to terms with it. And as Phil said, yes, it will grow back, but I really battled with it. It's like, well, I don't want it to go in the first place, but once you get your head around it, you do accept it.
Thanks, Angela. I'm going to move on now to another side effect that happens for some people. It's chemo brain or brain fog. So, Gemma, are there many people experiencing this?
Yeah, I'd say most people, to be honest. We don't really know the cause of it. And really, when we look into it, we think it's related to the fatigue that's caused during chemotherapy. And it's a lot to do with that cell breakdown and those cells regrowing again. The body's very, very busy during this time. There's a thought that if it is related to fatigue, it can be lymphoma itself that's causing this. But we also know that even when we're getting rid of the lymphoma, the chemo brain and the fatigue tends to continue to increase. So we think chemotherapy seems to have an accumulative effect, just like how it starts to make you anemic or it reduces your white cells each cycle that little bit more. It's also it's building up in the system. So we get more fatigue, we get more chemo brain. Generally, there's also the psychological issue of that. You're dealing emotionally and physically with an awful lot. There's a lot on your plate. A lot to think about, a lot to weigh up, and this tends to play with the mind. This occupies the mind during the time, and it has very little downtime. You find that you don't sleep quite the same. You might be used to getting up at 6 in the morning, going to work, coming home at 5, go back to sleep. That all changes when you're having chemo. You have more days off, you might have longer days, you might just not be working, in which case your routine is all a little bit up the wall as well. So it's about the brain getting used to that, and that also affects fatigue levels as well as chemo brain. Then, as I mentioned, there's things like anemia, changing in eating habits. It all has an impact as well. So from a management point of view, we talk about just being realistic with yourself. You know, set your goals, be realistic, make sure they are achievable. There's no point saying, you know, tomorrow I'm going to work from 9 till 5, then I'm going to walk the dog 8 miles. It is about being realistic. I'm going to work for 2 hours, I'm going to have an hour's break. And then I'm going to go back to it and I'm going to get this done. So having those realistic goals for you, and just really remembering it's likely to be temporary. There will be breaks in this. As Phil kept before, he kept a diary. It's a great plan for dealing with chemo brain. Is it worse on some days than the others? So can I plan my activities around how I think I'm going to be feeling during the cycles is also a good thing.
Thanks, Gemma. And so we kind of touched there on fatigue as well, but now I'm going to look at support for after treatment. What would you say to somebody, Angela, I'll come to you, what would you say to somebody who is about to start having treatment with chemotherapy?
I think Gemma's already picked up on a major point about being honest. So those people in your world, in your close world, that you know will get you through it, be really honest with them. I think people hear the word cancer and they're scared of it, and people will react in different ways. People will run away and won't want anything to do with you, and others will become your absolute, your friends and be there for you every step of the way. So be honest, but also be honest with yourself about what you can and can't do, because as I said, I wanted to be Wonder Woman and do everything that I normally do, and I learned very quickly that I wasn't going to be able to do that while I was going through treatment it was going to be a different Angela, and you just have to adapt to that. So I tried to just be as normal as possible, but I was realistic in what that normal was. So, if I used to do 2 Zumba classes a week, I learned really quickly I couldn't do Zumba anymore. And even now I can do 1 Zumba class a week, I can't do 2 anymore. I used to walk quite a way. I learned I couldn't walk the same distance. I could maybe make it down to the shops, which isn't that far from where I live, but at one occasion I thought I'm going to have to ring my husband to come and get me because I don't think I can walk back. So even though I wanted to remain normal, I think you just have to be realistic that it's going to have an effect on you and it is going to change you, and you almost have to embrace that and just go with it.
And Phil?
Yeah, exactly that. It's, I think, like Angela, I had a work ethic. I always had to be doing something, a bit of housework, out in the garden, DIY, work and all that sort of stuff. And I suppose thinking back on it it's like it's a big thing, when you've got lymphoma. It's it's potentially fatal thing. So I think seeing chemo, our main job as a patient is to get better. And I mean, I know that sounds a bit glib, but I suppose to provide the medical team with the best advantage possible by not overdoing it, by not trying to do things that are unrealistic. Early doors in chemo, I half started so many jobs around the house, but didn't get through them. Exactly like say, Angela, go down to the shops, completely knackered when I got down there. And why did I start pruning the climbing rose? Because it was obviously, and so I learned, and I would recommend anybody to see this period of time. Yeah, keep healthy, eat well. Keep meeting your support networks and things like that, but also take it easy. Give your body a chance to fight this thing off, and yeah, be realistic. Yeah.
Thanks very much for that, Phil. So Gemma, it can be a very challenging time for people who are going through treatment, and there's often a feeling at the end of the treatment that people should feel better. What would you say about this, and what's your advice?
I think to recognise right from the outset that you're going to come out of this as a very, very different person than the person who goes into it. It's about accepting it. I know we discussed earlier when we very first met, I describe it as a grieving process. You're going to be a different person. So don't expect to be, or that's physically, emotionally, whatever it is, you're not the same person when you come out of it. It's a huge life event being diagnosed with cancer. Be kind to yourself and recognise that this is a big deal. This is not something we can just brush under the carpet. This is a big deal. And it's a big experience to go through. So it's being kind to yourself and recognising that you are going to change through this process. And allowing that to happen. It's a perfectly normal process. Don't fight it. So to feel those emotions of anger, of upset, of resentment about losing who you were, whether that's the hair, the emotion, the physical ability, recognizing who you are as you come through it, and then working back to working who the new you is going to be. And things like energy levels, physical ability will come back over time. It may be different, but you're also going to be older. So you know, a bit of both. So be kind. We can work on these things slowly, but also recognize what's really important for you. So is there certain things you really want to continue throughout? Are there, you know, whether that's you pick the grandchildren up once a week, or you take the children swimming, or you walk your dog with your friend on a certain day. And let's see how we can still make those happen. So they become a priority, and cooking the tea 3 days a week or doing the washing up, let's move those down the list. You know, prioritize what's really important for the soul. We talk about spirituality, but not in a religious way. It's about looking at what is important to you. Equally, that could be church, it could be, you know, it doesn't matter, that community that you build. But recognize what's important, what makes you you, and prioritize that. So that still exists when you come out of it at the end, and we can work from there upwards, really. But be kind.
Thanks, Gemma. Thanks, Gemma. Can't believe where this hour's gone. So we're going to wrap up now. But before we do, for everybody who's watching this, we do have a top tips section, and there is a top tips for chemotherapy. So there's things like don't use your favorite products or cosmetics on day of chemotherapy because you might hate them in future. Phil, what's your top tip?
Well, I thought long and hard about this, and a nice, comfortable woolly hat, some really good fingerless gloves, and bed socks. That's nice. The best one I could come up with.
Right, and you did say that you left your lovely woolly hat somewhere on a bus,
yeah,
maybe?
Absolutely, and I'm still
that woolly hat.
Big hole in my life, you know, but there you go.
Angela, what's your top tip?
So mine is be kind to yourself. You know, just this is about you, and we're really bad as British people to make things about us, but this is about you, and you do what is right for you. And everybody's journey is completely different. And where I said that, you know, I put my makeup on, I put a wig on, I also put my best shoes on every time I went into the hospital, and I became a bit of a talking point even at reception about what shoes has she got on today, because that kind of made me feel better. It also made other people smile, and it made people smile in the chemo unit. So just be kind to yourself and do what's right for you.
That's excellent. I love that. Thank you so much. And thank you all. Thank you, Gemma, for giving us this time. It's been fantastic. And to you, Phil and Angela, thank you for your comments and your tips. So thanks very much, everybody. Bye now.
Thanks. Bye.